Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to one of the most exciting videos of the year, the Next.js 13 tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to all of the brand new features, such as the server components inside the brand new app directory, how you can share layouts while preserving state and avoiding expensive re-renders, and amazing new React features such as streaming and the ability to carry out data fetching inside of our server components. It's time to learn Next.js 13. Roll the intro. Next.js 13 is one of the biggest releases of the year from Vercel. It includes a bunch of new React features, including the new server components. Now, it's worth mentioning that at the point that this video is made, some of those features being used inside of Next.js 13 are in beta. However, I would recommend you go ahead, play with them, give the guys over at Vercel the feedback that they deserve, as it's most likely that these features will remain in React. However, just be prepared that they could change. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk mainly about the app directory, how we can change the traditional methods that we used in Next.js 12, such as getServerSideProps, getStaticProps, and getStaticPaths, and how we can more simply write them using the new Next.js 13 abilities. If you want me to cover more Next.js topics, such as TurboPack, the new Next.js image component, new Next font component, and the middleware updates, then let me know in the comments down below. Without further ado, let's jump into today's build. So first things first, I'm going to use the create next app command to go ahead and initialize my app. And I am going to be using the template with Tailwind CSS to go ahead and initialize my Tailwind in a faster manner. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say YouTube Next.js 13 demo. You can name it whatever you want. Now, something to bear in mind is that although Next.js 13 is a major upgrade to Next.js 12, what the team have done incredibly well is taken on this incremental adoption approach, which means that even if you're on Next.js 13, you don't have to make huge changes to your code. Sure, some changes are going to be made in the link component and the image component. However, your current page structure for how you go ahead and render out your pages doesn't need to change. Your new pages and the app directory can coexist until you migrate over the code to the newer server components. So don't freak out, take your time and enjoy the process. Once this is done, we're going to go into our code using YouTube Next.js 13 demo. I'm going to go ahead and hit code dot to open up my VS Code. So kicking things off, we can see we have a pages directory and a bunch of other things such as a Tailwind config, and everything has been configured for Next.js 12. So looking at this, how do we go ahead and convert this app into an app which is using Next.js 13? Well, firstly, let's just go ahead and run this app to get things up and running. So yarn run dev. I'm using yarn as I got a yarn lock file. You can use npm if you are using npm, right? So if you say package lock, yours is going to be an npm. So as you can see, my app is now running on the right hand side. This is the home page in the traditional Next 12 format. So as you can see, our page routes currently in Next.js 12 are formatted based on of the file name. Now we're going to go ahead and change this to the new app directory. Now it's worth mentioning that anything inside of the new app directory is actually going to be a server component. Now, I highly recommend that you have the Next.js 13 upgrade guide next to you as you follow out this tutorial, as it's going to have a bunch of tips and tricks that I may not mention inside of this video. Carrying on, we first need to enable the new app directory. So we go into our next config, head over to our module exports, and we're going to add in the experimental flag. And inside of this object, we're going to type in app directory true. So once I go ahead and hit save, I'm going to have to restart my next server. So I'm going to go ahead, hit yarn run dev, and you might get a prompt asking for your TypeScript support. So we're going to click allow, and you can see that we are now using the new experimental features. Now what I want you to do is head over to your Tailwind, and we're going to actually modify our Tailwind config so that way it actually includes the files inside of our app directory as well as our pages and our components folder. So in this case, this will now go ahead and compile out our Tailwind CSS code inside of our app directory as well as everything else that we previously were doing. Now, let's go ahead and create our first ever file. Now, there are 7 different reserved keywords when we are going ahead and creating a file. We have the layout, the page, the loading, error, template, head, and not found. Now you can find this information on the upgrade page, and you can go ahead and see how it's using that reserved keyword to go ahead and build out the file. But let's just jump into an example and it will make a hell of a lot more sense. So let's create our first ever page. So as you can see, now we have a new file directory whereby we have a root /segment/leaf. So I'm going to explain what the hell that means. So first up, on the highest level is our home page. In this case, we're going to call it page.tsx. I'm going to use my handy React snippets to create a React functional component. And here I'm going to go ahead and type in home. Right now, it really doesn't matter what you name it here. This is going to resemble our home page. So I'm going to say I am the home page. I'm going to hit save. Now, what we should see, if we look inside of our terminal, we will actually see that we have a conflicting app and page file found. This is because this is pointing to our home page as well as our index.tsx in our traditional Next.js approach. So we're going to delete our traditional Next.js index page. And now you can see we automatically got a layout.tsx file created for us. So what is a layout file? Now the new layout component is a really handy way to share different UI components in a kind of hierarchical fashion. So the really nice part about this is it preserves the state and prevents unnecessarily re-rendering several parts of the page. So here you can see we have a base HTML with our head and the body simply rendering the children. So the children is essentially the page.tsx. So let's go ahead and see, and now you can see I am the home page. But you're probably wondering, that does not look like we're using Tailwind CSS. So as you can see, what we previously did inside of our _app.tsx file was we imported our globals from our Tailwind CSS. Now what I can simply do is head over to my layout.tsx and paste it in at the top, and we can simply save. Now you can see we have our Tailwind CSS become active. So inside of my page, I can now go ahead, simply pop in a class name, make the text red, and you should see that we have successfully connected our Tailwind CSS. So what's the benefit of using this new layout approach? Well, I'm going to show you right now by creating a header component. So we're going to go ahead and create a header.tsx file. I'm going to go ahead and create that file right now. So here is an example of a header. So let's just assume that this is a random header. It's got a padding of 5. It's got a background blue of 500, and it's going to go ahead and surround the top. So now, instead of putting it inside the page, I can actually put this in the layout because I want it to be available throughout all of my pages on my site. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and spread the body like so, and simply pop inside of here. I can use the header component like so. This will pull in the header into my layout, and this header component will simply be rendered out onto the screen. Now it's probably better we use our actual correct syntax here. So in this case, we're going to pop in like so, put in a p tag just to say I am a header, just for now to be very simple and keep it very basic. And as you can see now, I am a header is going to be persistent across all of our screens from this moment forward. So let's go ahead and give it a nice little bit of styling to make it look a little bit cleaner. So in this case, I am the header. So now we have our header component at the top of the page. But what if I want to have a second page? Okay, so typically the way it would work in Next.js 12 is we would have a separate file. For example, we would have search.tsx that would resemble the /search page directory. Well, inside of Next.js 13, now we have a folder structure. Now in Next.js 13, we follow a new folder structure. We have the root segment, which is the starting point. This is essentially the index of the website. Then we have the segment, which is going to be the next most important part. And then we have the leaf segments, and it can be recurring on as you need it to be, right? So in this case, we're going to go ahead and create a nice example using a to-do example. So a very basic tutorial that we're going to go ahead and create today. Now, in order to have /to-dos, I just create a folder called to-dos, and inside I have all access to all of those 7 reserved file names that I spoke about previously. So let's go ahead and dive into the first one. Let's type in page.tsx. I'm going to use my React functional component snippet, and now I can go ahead and call this the to-dos page. And as you can see, this will actually create a page under /to-dos, but it follows this new page layout. So as you can see, we have this root layout, and then we have the segment inside of it. If I go to /todos, what we will now see is the to-dos page being rendered. But what's really cool here is the layout is going ahead and being persisted across the different screens. So I'm going to go ahead and actually implement a button inside of the header component, which will allow me to go back to the home page. So I'm going to use the link component, and previously we would have had to have an A tag inside of our link tags. However, in Next.js 13, now by default it generates an A tag for us. So now I can simply create a link called home, which is going to go ahead and go to the home directory. So I'm going to go ahead and pop in a bit of styling and then remove the I am header button. So as you can see now, we have a home button. Now, when I'm on the to-dos page, if I click this home button, you can see it loads up the home page. Okay, so as you can see, everything that we've created so far is actually server components, not client components. So this is something to understand. Whenever we are in the app directory, all of our components are server components by default. So next up, I want to create a list of the to-dos that can be listed out on the page. So what I'm going to do is create a handy little to-dos list component, which will render out all of the to-dos onto my page like so. So I'm going to actually use our current file directory. And what's nice about this directory is we can actually keep our components next to the level at which they're required, which allows us to essentially remove the components folder. However, you can still have a components folder. Just bear in mind that if it's outside of the app directory, it by default will not be a server component. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a to-dos list.tsx component. We're going to create this to-dos list. And inside of this component, I'm going to simply go ahead and create a call to fetch my to-dos. Now, typically, this is something that was unheard of before. You wouldn't be able to go ahead and make an await call to fetch some to-dos inside of your functional component. Typically, you would have to have a piece of state, and you were not allowed to make your functional components async. It was just simply against the rules. Well, now we can do that, as this is by default a server component. So we're actually going to go ahead and create a fetch to-dos function, which will help us go ahead and achieve what we need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and create a fetch to-dos function, which is an asynchronous function. And inside of this function, I'm going to make a call to an API, an external API. And this is a dummy API called JSON placeholder. And what this API will do is it will return me an array of to-do objects. So next up, we're going to go ahead and actually pass the information. So once we go ahead and get the JSON from our response, this will give us back the to-dos. Now, I actually know the type that this comes back as. So what I'm going to do is create a type definition file. So I'm going to go into my code and type a typings.d.ts file, and inside of here I'm actually going to create a type definition for my to-do, as I'm going to be using it throughout the code. Now what we can do is we can simply cast this to our to-do component. Once we've done this, all we need to do is simply return the to-dos to the appropriate function. So as you can see now, what we can easily do is we can actually go ahead and fetch at the highest level now in React. And this is thanks to it being a server component. And now one thing to bear in mind is if you ever need to use any kind of click handler or a hook or any interactive element that requires binding to an element, you need to switch to a client component. And I'm going to go ahead and show you a nice little graphic of just how to do that in a second. But for now, what we're actually going to go ahead and do is render out the list of items in a simple mapping like so. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap our entire return statement in fragments and pop out a map with the link component like so. And all this will be doing is it will direct us to to-dos / the to-do ID that is returned, and it will list out the to-do names. So essentially all we're doing is we're listing out a bunch of to-dos onto the screen. Now inside of our to-dos component, I just need to go ahead and render my new to-dos list component. And we need to import it like so. Now, one thing that's a known bug at the moment with the TypeScript and Vercel team is that they don't currently have the TypeScript definition. So by the time you're watching this, this will most likely be fixed. However, there is a hacky solution. However, for now, until they have been completed, I am simply going to TypeScript ignore this error. And I'm going to get a bunch of hate for that in the comments, but it's okay. So let's go ahead and go over to / to-dos. Now on the to-dos page, we should be able to see a list of all of the different to-dos that have been popped out from that API call. So this is actually being rendered on the server. So at this point, when we make the fetch call, if I make a simple fetch to say this is the to-dos, and we simply log it out, what we should see is now it's only being rendered out in the terminal for the server. So something to know here is that as we are only rendering this on the server, it's only the console logs will only be visible on the terminal and not on the browser. Now, as we are currently using a link component, what it will try to do is it will try to prefetch these pages in advance to help it seem like it's an instant user experience. So in that case, we need to actually go ahead and create these pages so that Next.js knows what the hell to do when it sees that route. Otherwise, we're going to get a bunch of errors where it's trying to find the page, but it simply can't find that page. So you can see to-dos 31, 32, it's trying to find it, it can't find it. So at this point now, I need to create a dynamic route. Now, how do we create a dynamic route? Well, typically what we would have done is create a file inside of a folder with the square bracket notation. Now, in this case, all we have to do is create a folder inside of our to-dos, and we simply give this the to-do ID. So this could be given the ID. It really doesn't matter what the name is. You just have to make sure that we relate to that in our code down the line. So I'm going to create a to-do ID folder, and inside of there, we're going to use the same syntax that we were previously using, page.tsx. So I'm going to create my functional component, and I'm going to call this my to-do page. And this is going to resemble the page for the to-do. Now, to go ahead and access the individual to-do ID, so in this case, if I went to /3, I need to know what the root query param is. So I need to know what number is at the end or what the dynamic root value is. So in this case, we actually get a bunch of props that come back. Now you can console log these out and you'll find that you get a bunch of params and search params. But in this case, as we don't have the type definitions available yet, I'm going to go ahead and create my own page props like so. So I'm actually going to create my page props, and then I'm going to go ahead and call it the params. So I've already done this work for you. So we've got the params, and then we've got the to-do ID. Now the to-do ID should correlate to whatever you've given the value over here. So at this point, we've got our props. I'm going to destructure the params, and then I'm going to go ahead and get out the to-do ID like so. Okay, so now I've got my to-do page, and all I can do to simply go ahead and pop things out is I can go ahead and say to-do ID. Now, if I'm on to-dos /9, we can see that it goes ahead and says to-do page number 9. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage the power of the server components to actually go ahead and fetch each to-do as we get onto this page. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and say const to-do equals await. And in order to use await, we have to make our overall function asynchronous. And then I want you to go ahead and create a function called fetch to do. We're simply going to pass in the to do ID to this function. So I'm going to go ahead and create the outline of the function like so. Secondly, I'm going to go ahead and make an async await call to a third-party URL. So in this case, we've got a API request being made to the JSON placeholder typecode.com/todos, and then we're using our to-do ID that we pass in as our query param. This will go ahead and load that individual to-do from that dummy URL. And then we're going to go ahead and pass the response. Now, the type of response that comes back will be in that same to-do type that we went ahead and typed out earlier. I'm actually going to go ahead and return a bunch of information. So we've got a simple p tag with the to-do ID, the to-do title. We have a ternary operator. If it's completed, it will say yes or no. And then we've got the user with some basic styling around it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And as you can see now, it loads up that individual to-do based on whichever one is loaded on the screen. So as I change it, we're on to-do number 3 and so forth. And if it's completed, it'll say no. And just like that, it works. So what we can actually do now is this is actually essentially doing the same job as server-side rendering. So if we were to actually go ahead and build this right now, if we did yarn run build, what you will actually see is that this page will be known as a server-side rendered page. And that's because what we are essentially doing every single time is a fresh fetch call to go ahead and get this working. So as you can see, the to-dos page is known as a server-side rendered page. So I'm going to show you how we can implement all of the clever rendering techniques such as static site generation, server-side rendering, and ISR using the following. So now what they've done amazingly is they've upgraded the fetch API. So all we need to do is add a second argument here and we type in cache. Now on cache, we've got a bunch of different options. So very simply, if we wanted to force the server-side rendering method that we previously knew, we simply put in no cache. If we want to go ahead and enforce a static site generation approach, then we add a cache. And if we want to go ahead and have ISR, whereby we can revalidate the pages after a certain given time, then we need to go ahead and have in the following like so. We add in next, and then we pass in the revalidate argument with a time. So this is the number of seconds that we want to allow to pass before Next.js will try to revalidate that page in the cache, which is incredibly powerful if you don't know how to do so already. So I'm not going to dive too far down ISR, but that's essentially how we go ahead and get this working. Now, you cannot use SSG, so static site generation, so where we have the ability to cache, or the next ISR if you aren't telling Next.js how to figure out the initial pages to go ahead and render. So how does it know whether to render to-dos /1 up until 100? It has no idea at this point how to go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this here. So we have ISR up to 60 seconds, revalidating our cache. And then I'm going to use the new generateStaticParams function. So in this argument, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function, and this function is basically going to allow us, so this is a reserved function similar to getStaticPaths in the previous Next.js 12. And what we're essentially doing here is we need to go ahead and make a call to our backends. We're making the same call that we had previously to our to-dos list. So where we are able to fetch the to-dos, we're actually going to use this exact same argument. So what you could do at this point is refactor this code and pull this out as necessary. However, in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and for demonstrational purposes, pop this in like so. So at this point, we are fetching all of the possible to-dos that we can go ahead and render. Then what we need to do is simply return it in a format which looks something like this. So we need to go ahead and actually create all of the page routes. So in this case, our arguments would look something like this. It would have to-do ID 1. And then in the second argument, which would have to-do ID 2 and so forth, right? All the way up until the final to-do in our response. So in this case, it will go up to, I believe, 200 responses. So how do we go ahead and transform our to-dos into this? Well, it's actually quite simple. All we need to do is return the following. We're going to go ahead and map through, and for each to-do, turn an object where the key is the to-do ID, and the to-do ID, convert the to-do ID to a string value. Now, this is probably the biggest thing that I find students slip up on. This has to be a string. Otherwise, you'll get an error whereby it's saying that it expected a string and instead you've given it a number. So make sure you do that. And now what we've done is we've generated all of these to-dos and we've got back this approach. So what we've essentially done now is we've told Next.js how to go ahead, head over to this URL like so, and generate all of the pages up until 200. Okay, so now that we've done that, what we're actually going to do before we run our build is we're actually going to go ahead and trim this down. Because we are using a test API, I don't actually want to get rate limited, as I think there's a limit of 50 requests consecutively before they stop your build, before they stop your network requests coming in. So for this demo is I've simply gone ahead and basically spliced the first 10 pages. So essentially all we're doing here is we're pre-rendering only up to the first 10 pages, right? So this is only for the demo purposes. However, in production, you could just remove this line and do that as you need to. But in this case, we can actually go ahead and test it, and you guys can test it very easily like so. So I want to go ahead and build this now. So yarn run build. And now what we should see is rather than it being a server-side rendered route, it's going to actually statically generate each of those pages. So let's have a look. So now you can see we've got this dark tick, which is static site generated. And this is saying that it's generated the pages for to-dos /to-dos 1, 2, 3, all the way up until the 10th page. So now, if we were to go ahead and actually run our pre-built website, so in this case, let's do yarn run. start, this will run our code not in developer mode, but instead using the build output. So let's run yarn run start, and what we should see is it's incredibly fast for everything up until the 10th to do. So let's go ahead and check this out. So if I go to / to-dos, what we should see is all of our different to-dos. And if I click on number 7, you see how quick that was? Super fast at loading, right? If I go to number 2, it's super quick. If I go to number 6, it's super fast. Now, remember I said it only built up to number 10. So to-dos / 10. So what happens if I know for a fact that there is about 200 to-dos on that list? Previously, what we could do was something called fallback. We had a fallback option in ISR. And what this did was, if the original page wasn't statically generated at build time, what we could do is we can attempt to server-side render that page and actually cache it if we get a hit back. And if we don't get a hit back, we can actually say, whoa, there was no page that was returned. So let's give this a try. Now, by default, this behavior is actually on. So if I went ahead and aimed to go to, for example, 15, which was not statically generated, I can go ahead and see that it actually loaded for me and it would have cached it. If I go to 100, you can see that it took a little bit longer because it had to server-side render that page and then go ahead and cache it. So now if I go back to 15, it's extremely fast. If I go back to 100, it's extremely fast. But if I go to 101, server-side renders it, caches it. And we now have the ability to dynamically server-side render the pages which were not statically generated at build time. This is really powerful, and something to absolutely know about this is that when we generate those pages, they are not updated. So they are still statically generated pages which will stay that way. The only way to revalidate those pages and ensure that they're up to date using ISR, so Incremental Static Regeneration, is by having the revalidate option. So this means at most at every single 60 seconds when a user tries to come to the page, after 60 seconds has elapsed, it will basically invalidate the cache and it will rebuild. Now, it's important to know that the user who comes there before 60 seconds is going to get served the old version, and after that 60 seconds, it will server-side render the new version of the page and it will replace the cache, and then so forth. So you will always be within the correct version of that page within 60 seconds in this example. And you can change that number based on your requirement. Now we can actually toggle the ability to generate or server-side render pages that were not originally created when we statically built the website by doing the following. So we can use this dynamic params equals true option. Now by default, this is true. And this is a keyword that we can export, and it tells Next.js that we actually want to have that ability to try to server-side render a page. The problem with this is that if we do this and we try to access, for example, the 1 millionth to do, what we'll find is we get this unexpected behavior where there was no hit and Next.js didn't know what to do. So in order to avoid this problem, what we're actually going to do is, firstly, I'm going to restart my app in development mode. So that way I can actually go ahead and get a real-time server-side rendering approach each time. And I need to basically put a simple check in at this point. So what we actually have access to now is a handy new function called not found that we can import from Next navigation. So at this point, what I can do is I can simply go ahead and say if there is no to-do.id. So if there is no to-do ID, I simply want to return the not found argument. Okay. Now, if we hit save and I go to the 1 millionth page and I hit enter, what it will try to do is it will try to server-side render it. It will then get a to-do response back, which would probably be undefined in this case. It found that there was no property, and then it would return a not found page. And then the next natural thing is, well, that's pretty cool, but this 404 does not look the nicest, right? Again, they've got us sorted over here with the new 7 reserved pages that we can use. One of those pages is the not found TSX page. And you can use the .js file notation as well. I'm just showing you the TypeScript way. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a functional component here to resemble our not found page. And this is going to say, whoops, we couldn't find the to-do you are looking for. right? So very simple, quick little explanation. Hit a refresh. And now what we will find is you'll simply get this message on the screen if you ever hit the 404 state. However, if I hit something that was present in the state, so for example, 55, this wasn't present in the initial build, but it was server-side rendered in. There you can see 55. Now it's worth mentioning when you're running in developer mode, so yarn run dev or npm run dev, it's always going to server-side render. The only way you can really test your statically generated pages is by doing yarn run build or npm run build and then npm run start to go ahead and see the effect of your statically generated site. That way you'll notice that immediate speed boost for the pages which were initially loaded in. Now we're going to actually customize it a little bit further. So on the to-dos level, so at this level, I'm going to create a layout.tsx file. And on this file, I'm going to go ahead and put the following code. So I'm going to go ahead and simply use a to-dos list call. So in this case, I've got my root layout at this level. And what we're doing here is we're returning the main, in which case it's going to be a flexbox. And we have two children of that flexbox, one being the to-dos list and one being the rest of the children, which should take up the remainder of the space. So I'm going to simply hit save. So now what I need to do is head over to my initial page. And we can actually simplify this. We can simply go ahead and put a H1 saying, this is where the to-dos will be listed, ... Right? And what's really nice about this now is, as you can see, when we reach this page, forgive the UI, we haven't put much effort in, but in this case, we've got all of our to-dos here. And when I select one of my to-dos, as it's taken this incremental layout approach, so as you can see, we've still got our header from our root layout, and then we're inheriting our next segment layout. Now what you can see is it will only re-render this portion. So as you can see, when I click on one of these to-dos, what you'll notice is only this portion of the screen is going to get re-rendered. So let's give that a try and see if it works. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, for example, to-do number 2. And as I click that, you see it loads in my to-do number 2. If I click on number 5, it will go ahead and load up number 5 and so forth, right? So this works in the exact same way, but now our code is incredibly simple. So as you can see, all our code consists of is the presentational logic for what should be on that page. It is separated from the initial layout. So all this is going to take is a mindset shift to understand how we can separate our different components from one another, but the power and the trade-off is incredibly awesome. Next up, we're going to use an example of a search. And in this example, I'm going to demonstrate to you a few different aspects, how we can use the new loading file, how we can use the new error file, and how we can go ahead and allow for streaming inside of our components. So that way, when our server components are loading, we actually get a nice loading indicator to allow the user to have an immediate response on the page. We're also going to go ahead and show you how to create your first client component if you need to have some interactivity. And let me know what's been your favorite so far down in the comments. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go ahead and go to our top level. So I'm going to click on app. Now I'm going to create a new route for something called a search. Okay. Now on the /search route, I want to go ahead and create a page.tsx, which resembles my search homepage. So in this case, I'm just going to call this one a search. Now, as you can see, just like that, if I go to my /search page, automatically have my header completed, which is in this case, has automatically been inherited down from the layout for me. So now what I want to do is I want to create a layout component for this segment. Okay. Now for this segment, I'm going to go ahead and pop the following in. So what I ideally want to have a search. So in this case, you can see we've got a main, we've got our div, and then we've got a div here. So in this case, I've got a flexbox with some space between them. We've got two children components, and one is a search component that we are going to go ahead and create. Now, the second one is the rest of the page that will get loaded out of this route. We need to create a search component. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we're going to go ahead and create a search.tsx component, right? And let's go ahead and pop in our search component. So say I am a search component. So very simply, just like that, we now have a search component. Let's go ahead and hit refresh. And as you can see now on my screen, I've got a nice, easy, simple layout based on the following. First div, which is just a simple title to say search. Then we've got a gap and we've got our second div, and the top part is going to be the search component responsible for allowing the user to type in. So this is going to be a client component. And then we're going to have a button to search, and it will take us to a search / the search term root. And that's going to dynamically server-side render the results on the page. So let's jump into how we can achieve this. So first things first, let's create an interactive client-side component. Now, the reason we're going to need a client-side component right now is because of the following. Now, our thought process when we're using Next.js 13 is this. We should always try to think of the solution in regards to a server component, because we're going to essentially be getting the benefits of a server component. We're going to lose the risk of exposing keys. We're going to allow the heavy lifting to be done off of the client's device, which should speed up a lot of the interactivity. And what we should only do if we require it, and only if we need to, we convert it to a client component. So in this case, I need an input so that the user can type in a search term. So I have to use a client component. Now you can head over to the when to use server versus client component section in the Next.js beta docs, and you should see this right here. And as you can see, the main reasons for using a client component is when you need to add interactivity or event listeners, or you need to use state and lifecycle effects, browser-only APIs, or custom hooks, or class components. So think of it, anything that requires statefulness, or anything that requires a browser, or any element to be binded to, can't be done on the server, has to be done on the browser. So at that point, we convert to a client-side component. So it's very easy to go ahead and convert to a client-side component. Let's head over into our search component. And to do this, all we need to do is type in the following directive at the top. We type in use client. And just like that, we now have a client-side component. First things first, we're going to go ahead and create our search field. So we're going to first import some dependencies that we might need. So we're going to import the use router from the new Next navigation, not Next router. Then we're going to import the form state, use state, and React from React, as we're going to need those eventually. Then we're going to write the body of our function and export it accordingly. So this is a normal client-side component. We're then going to prepare some state. So in this case, we've got our search that we're going to go ahead and eventually use for the input field. And we're going to get a router instance. So that way we can make a redirect once the user actually goes ahead and inputs a search term. Then we're going to go ahead and create our helpful handle search function, which will be bound to a form that will be submitted at this point. So let me explain what's going on here. So first things first, let's hit save and let's see the output that we can see on the page. So I'm going to give our button a little bit of basic styling so that way it can go ahead and look a little bit more like a search button. And in this instance, what we're essentially doing is every time the user types in, we are simply mapping our on change to the piece of state inside of our React component. So in this case, we have access to our search term at all times. Now, what we want to do is when the user actually submits the form, so on submit, it will actually go ahead and submit this handle search function. And we're going ahead and using the correct type definitions. Now, if you don't know the type definitions, here's a little trick how you can go ahead and get them. So if you ever need to get the type definition, but you have no idea and you run into this error, simply go ahead and use the following trick. I love sharing it with everyone. Simply put an E and an arrow, and you will get the actual type definition over here. So form element, HTML form element. You simply pop that in just like so, and then you replace the call like that. And that's how you get the perfect element type every single time. So in this case, we're going to prevent default behavior of refreshing. We're going to set the search to empty after they search, and we're simply going to push the user to search / the search term. We want to redirect the user. So if I type in JavaScript, we are going to redirect the user to search / JavaScript. So the segment will be search, the leaf node will be JavaScript. At this point, we now need to create our new search term page. Okay, so at this point, it's very simple to do that. All we need to do is create a folder and call it search term. So in this case, we're going to say search term. And inside of here, we're going to create a page.tsx. And this is going to resemble our search results page. Okay. Now on this page, it's going to be a very simple layout. So on this page, we're actually going to go ahead and do the following. So firstly, we need to go ahead and grab whatever the user has typed in the search and actually use that to make a fetch call to an external API, which will give us a bunch of search results. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to go ahead and say const search results equals await search term. Okay, now the search term we get from our params. So in this case, we're going to get a bunch of props. So let's go ahead and get our props from our page props. And I've written out our prop types that come through here. This is very similar to what we did earlier. So as you can see, we get the props coming in the form of our page props like so. So we're going to destructure this to get the search term out of it. Nice. We're going to make a function asynchronous, and then we simply need to go ahead and create a search function. So in this case, I'm going to create a search function, which is an asynchronous function. It takes our search term as an argument. Now at this point, I've made a call to an external API. So what I've actually done here is make a call to the serpappy.com/search API. And this is a really nice API that you can use to go ahead and create essentially a Google search. Now, all you need to do is sign up to their site. So it's free to do so. And they give you a really nice kind of, I think it's 100 free searches when you sign up. So let's go ahead and test that right now. So all you need to do is head over to your dashboard, create a free account, and you'll get a nice private key that will be shown down here. You simply want to copy your private key, and don't worry about copying my key because I'm going to invalidate it after this is done. And then you want to go ahead and store it in your environment variables. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create an environment file. So env local. I'm going to go ahead and pop in my API key like so, paste it in, and I'm going to close my file. So in this case, we've got a serpappy search. The search term is going to be our query param, and then we're passing in the key like so. Now they do have a Node.js library. However, we're not going to use it to keep things very simple in today's build. I'm also going to go ahead and write the bare minimal type definitions for the response that comes back. So what I've actually saved you the headache of doing is I've condensed down the search results that come back in the form of the array over here like so. So the actual search results are something along the lines of this. So we actually get a massive object back with lots of different keys and values. But in this case, all we care about is the organic results section and a few different fields. So what we're actually going to do at this point, render out some results on the page. I'm going to pop in a p tag where we go ahead and we say we searched for the term that is going to be whatever the user searched for. We've given it a bit of minimal styling. Then I've got a ordered list, and we're simply mapping through the organic results and we're listing them out accordingly. So let's see the output of this on our screen right now. As you can see, we've actually got a really nice web page on the screen. So if I was to go ahead and show you right now how this works, let's go to our /search React.js, and let's click search. And as you can see, we have a slight delay, and then it loads onto the screen. Now, the reason why we get that delay is because it's actually blocking at this point. But what is incredibly powerful is that with Next.js 13, we have the addition of these new loading and error files. So in this case, if I create a new loading.tsx file, which is a reserved file, and we create a functional component, so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and call it loading. Now I can say loading search results. And what will happen is at this level, when we have any blocking function, it's going to go ahead and show that loading placeholder as a fallback. So let's go ahead and give that a nice try. So let's actually head back over to our search term, and let's go ahead and type in something like Papa React and hit search. Now you can see loading search results, and then bam, you can see the course comes up. Amazing stuff. Look at that. There you go. So as you can see, that's really awesome, and it works through and through. So what we actually have right here is a server component with only one slight small part of it being a client-side component. So this entire site so far has been achievable with server components and the ability to stream in the data as and when it is ready. So in this case, if I was to type in JavaScript and hit in enter, so JavaScript, oops, it would help if I spell, hit enter. Now you can see loading search results, and bam, it's jumped in. So that is actually the power of streaming inside of React, and Next.js handles it beautifully. Now, what happens if we have an error? So let's go ahead and assume that we had an error at some point, and I'm going to go ahead and simply throw an error saying, whoops, something broke. Okay. Now at this point, I don't want my entire code to break and freak out. Instead, all I need to do is create a error.tsx file. Okay, now in this error.tsx file on the Next.js website, you can actually find a really nice error example. So if we head over to the error page right here, you can use this as your boilerplate to go ahead and get this set up. Now this is a client-side component because the error is likely to happen on the client. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and pop this in. And as you can see, it gives us two arguments, the error and the reset function. The error is essentially going ahead and being collected on a user effect. So when the component mounts, if there was an error, it's going to log out to the user's browser. And then we're going to go ahead and say something went wrong. Now, something to bear in mind is if we were to go ahead and do this now, so if I was to go ahead and hit save, what we will see is it will throw an error. Now, on the developer environment, we will see this error being shown on the screen, but on production, this won't be shown to us. And as you can see, instead, what will happen is we will render out the UI for the error. So in this case, you will render this out. So you can have something quite nice, you know, a picture of a dog confused saying, whoops, something went wrong, whatever you really want. And then you actually have a ability to reset. And in that case, it resets the error boundary. So we can handle our loading states, we can handle our error states, and we can do so much more with Next.js 13. Now, if that wasn't enough, if you want to go ahead and customize the head attributes. So for example, in this instance, if we were to go ahead and close this out, as you can see, I've got this horrible head syntax right here. So what I want to instead do is on my default page layout, I'm going to enforce that, you know, my majority of my website says that this is Sunny's website. Okay. So this is going to be throughout the majority of my website. So if we refresh, now you can see the title is Sunny's website, but I want it to change based on if I'm in the search section or if I'm in the to-do section of my site. So let's go ahead and demo how I can do that. Well, as I mentioned, there was a bunch of different reserved file names, and I had in a head.tsx file. Now in here, I can actually go ahead and create a simple functional component, call it head, and simply all I need to do right here is start putting in the properties that I would like to go ahead and inject into my head document. So at this point, all I have to do is go ahead and type in the title. So in this case, I can put in the title and I can go ahead and say the search page, right? So this is going to be the search page and hit save, right? And just like that now, when I come onto this page, you can see it enters in the search page like so. We have no errors on the screen, and that's where it can go ahead and work perfectly, right? If we went ahead and went to the to-dos section, you can see it goes back to Sunny's website, right? Even if I'm on a to-do number 5 or wherever I am on the page right now. So if I go ahead and click into my to-do, you can see that I'm still on Sunny's website because the fallback was the title Sunny's website. So it follows that hierarchical approach, and it only activates or changes our head component if it finds one at that segment or leaf node. Now, we are not finished yet. I told you this was going to be a full in-depth tutorial, and I meant it. We actually have another amazing feature that the guys over at Vercel have actually introduced that not many people have actually spoken about, and this is the introduction of group roots. So when our folder structure gets a little bit more complicated, let's imagine we had one more root. Okay, so now I have a / developer page, and we have a / search term page, and a / to-dos page. But let's imagine that the search and the to-dos was purely for users, and we only wanted a page for the admins, but we wanted to separate it in regards to our folder structure. Now, in order to do this, you would wonder that if I introduce a new folder, I'm actually going to break my routing system. So what the guys over at Next.js did is introduced us to the concept of root groups. So now we have this amazing way to go ahead and do this by using parentheses. So as you can see, we can separate our concerns inside of our app, and it will be emitted from the page root. So if we had a marketing section, it would not show marketing about. as long as we have these parentheses. So let's go ahead and give this a try in our code. And this shouldn't change any of your routes. So if I go to the app level and I create a folder, and I'm going to call any of my user facing stuff user, I'm going to put this inside the users folder, and I'm going to create another folder at this level, and we're going to call this the admin stuff. Now, this does not protect your routes. They will be introducing a feature to help do that very shortly. However, this does not actually change or affect any of the routes as such. All we now can do is we can actually move each of these into the appropriate folder. So the search is going to be something for the users, and we're going to want to update all of our user imports and so forth for the to-dos. Yep, there we go. And as you see, update imports, yes, we want to do that. And then we want to go ahead and pop in our developer into admin as well. So once we make that change, make sure you've updated all your imports correctly. And then you want to go ahead and simply restart your server as you made pretty drastic folder change. Okay. So once we've done that, hit a refresh. And what you should see is none of our routes have been affected by this change. If I go to my / homepage, we see that it's the homepage. If I go to my search page, we can now see I still get the search page. My search still works. So if I click on React, we still get the same search results that we expected previously. And if I go to my to-dos page, I still get the to-dos that I previously built out before. You can see that no change has been made to my folder structure. So this is something that I haven't seen many tutorials about, but I think it's actually a really cool addition to the Next.js 13 arsenal of tools that have been delivered to us. Now, it's worth mentioning that if you do this change, we have to consider a certain few things. If we want to have a layout inside of either the users or admin, what we have to do is remove it from this top level, because essentially these folders are invisible to some degree, which means that if they're invisible, we can't actually, if we added a layout here, it would also resemble the same level as here. And if I added a layout here, it would also resemble the same layout as here. Same for the page and so forth. So at this point, if you want to have a home page, you can keep your home page here, or you can keep the layout at the top level. But if you want to have a separate page in here or in here, you can only have one home page, right? So in this case, this can be a little bit confusing because we have only got one folder. So let's imagine I had another folder in here called dashboard. So let's just imagine it was a dashboard / and then that had a file inside of it. So page.tsx RFCE, very quick boilerplate code for that. Let's just call that dashboard. So in this case now, if I had my app, which has two things inside, my admin, which has two things inside, my users, which have two things inside, and I moved my page, for example, to this level, now that would be completely fine. But if I added a page here and I added a page here, they would be fighting for the / directory because they're both essentially at the higher level. So if we do want to have separate layouts for each one, we would have to delete the layout at this level and create two new layouts here, but we can only have the page at one of these levels. Right now, as I mentioned, this is completely new. So if I have made any mistakes or if anything doesn't make sense like it should, then please feel free to comment down below. I'm happy to take on feedback. As always, I'm learning this tech as well. I just want to bring more value to you guys as well. Now, finally, as a bonus, I want to show you the React Suspense boundary. So the React Suspense boundary is an incredibly awesome but often misunderstood component. So I want to show you a nice little demo of how we can use this and how it's actually really powerful if we think about it. So on the homepage, I'm going to have two simple calls. So I'm just pretending at this point. All I'm trying to show is how we can wait on two different promises in a different way. So at this point, I'm going to have two divs and pretend that this was a shopping trolley or some other aspect, right? So I'm going to show you how we're going to effectively show you this in a second, right? For now, until a TypeScript fix is around, we're just going to ignore at this point. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to wrap my suspense. I'm going to wrap this with something called the suspense boundaries. So I'm going to wrap the first one with a suspense boundary, and I'm going to wrap the second with a suspense boundary like so. Okay, so this is where it gets really cool. Now, just like we have server components that get blocked by their await calls, for example, in the search term page, when we are fetching our search term, All right, so when we're actually fetching our search results, we were showing a loading state, right? So at this point, we can also do this using a different component. So if we were to use the suspense boundary, we can actually use something called the fallback component. And here, all it takes is a little component inside of it. So at this point, I can simply put in a p tag that says loading the to-dos. And let's do the exact same thing at this point, but saying loading the shopping trolley. And to emphasize this, what I'm actually going to do is, you're probably wondering, they're going to load at the exact same time. So for the to-dos list, when I have my fetch to-dos, I'm simply going to add in a small little timeout, which is going to resemble a random timer from 1 to 5 seconds, okay? So that way they should go ahead and pop in at different times. So all I'm doing here is I'm waiting a random amount of time between 1 and 5 seconds every time fetch to-dos is called. So at this point, now what I can do, if I go back into my page.tsx, so let's have a look what happens now. If I go home, if I hit the refresh button, you can see we've got loading to-dos, and then we've got loading the shopping trolley, which takes a different amount of time. So before I run this test, I'm actually going to go ahead and have a p tag styling over here, hit save. And now if I was to go ahead and refresh, you can see that the top one beat it, and then the second one came in second. And as you can see here, they will pop in when they're both ready accordingly. Now, this is the power of streaming. It won't block our UI. Instead, it will just stream in the data as and when it is available. This is incredibly powerful, and it's the power of the Suspense API. And as you can see, this was also happening inside of the search page previously. So when we were previously searching for a different term, so in this case, if I typed in something like Papa React and we hit search, instead now we're essentially waiting on that promise, and then when it's ready, it will stream in the data as it's ready. So what's really awesome about this is using the new layout. We're no longer unnecessarily re-rendering components such as this or such as the search field down below, right? Instead now we're only re-rendering the area where the new data was added in. So as you can see, Next.js 13 requires a little bit more than just a play with new tech approach. It requires a little bit of a mindset shift to server-based thinking first. So now we think of things in terms of server components, and then we only use client components as and when we need them. It will take some time for all of us to get to the point where we're pros at this, but I promise you on this channel, I'm going to be delivering so much content which leverages this, so you will have plenty of opportunities to go ahead and run with this. And before you know it, you'll be a pro at using Next.js 13 and transforming code from Next.js 12 to Next.js 13. With that said, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I have actually already been on the grind and covered tons of Next.js 13 content in my course, Zero to Full Stack Hero. If you're interested, head to papareact.com/course. As always, guys, if you enjoyed this content, please make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know right now in the comments down below what part of Next.js 13 is your favorite. Until next time, it's your boy Papa React. Peace.